Sun-drenched days, carefree laughter, the promise of escape. Summer holidays. But sometimes, beneath the golden haze, a different kind of heat simmers. The chill of true terror. Welcome, seekers of the shadows and the sunshine, to Nightmare True Horror. Tonight, we unpack 7 true tales where idyllic vacations curdled into unforgettable dread. What unsettling memories do your own summer escapes hold? The comments are open for your sun-bleached confessions. If the thought of idyllic settings masking profound horror intrigues you, consider this your invitation to subscribe. But the journeys we're embarking on tonight are particularly deceptive, and the most disquieting truths often reveal themselves when you least expect. Under the most brilliant sky, the cedar-scented air hit us as we stepped onto the cabin's wraparound porch. Exhausted from the 4-hour drive from Boston, pine needles crunched under our feet, and the lake stretched before us like black glass, reflecting the late afternoon sun. My wife Sarah was already smiling, the stressed lines around her eyes softening for the first time in months. "This is perfect, David," she said, squeezing my hand. Our kids, Emma and Jake, had already spotted the rope swing and were racing toward the dock, their laughter echoing across the water. That's when I noticed the welcome basket. It sat on the picnic table, wrapped in cellophane with a cheerful bow, like something from a magazine spread. Inside were Emma's specific gluten-free crackers, the expensive kind from that one health food store near our house. Jake's obsession with those weird dill pickle chips that only one grocery chain carried. Sarah's favorite dark roast coffee from a local Boston roastery. And at the bottom, a 6-pack of that craft IPA I discovered at a tiny brewery in Cambridge. A beer so obscure I'd never seen it anywhere else. My stomach tightened. "How did they know?" I murmured, holding up the beer. Sarah glanced over, distracted by the kids' shouts. "Know what? These are our exact favorites. Brands we've never mentioned to anyone." The welcome note was generic. "Hope you enjoy your stay. Hope you enjoy your stay." Like heavier properties. But the contents were anything but. This level of specificity suggested research, deep research. I'm David Chen, a software engineer with a healthy paranoia about digital privacy. 3 days ago, we'd booked this remote cabin on Moosehead Lake through a rental app. The host had been accommodating, but mysterious, communicating only through automated messages. Now, staring at this impossibly personalized basket, every instinct screamed that something was wrong. But Sarah was already unpacking, and the kids were begging to swim. I pushed down the unease, telling myself I was overthinking things. Maybe they checked our social media, or made lucky guesses. The lake was beautiful, the cabin pristine. We needed this vacation. The first 2 days passed in a blur of swimming, hiking, and campfires. The kids were in heaven, and Sarah finally looked relaxed. I almost forgot about the welcome basket. Almost. But small things kept nagging at me. Fresh footprints in the soft earth outside our bedroom window. Too large to be Sarah's or the kids'. The screen door I was certain I'd latched, hanging slightly open in the morning. And sometimes, sitting on the porch with my coffee, I'd catch movement in my peripheral vision. A flash of color between the trees, gone before I could focus on it. "Just paranoid," I muttered. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger each day. On the 3rd morning, Jake wanted to explore the property boundaries. We followed an overgrown trail into the dense woods, the canopy blocking most of the sunlight. That's when I saw it. A small, camouflaged box strapped to an oak tree, about 30 feet from our bedroom window. A trail camera. My blood turned to ice as I approached it. The device was professional grade, positioned with a clear view of the master bedroom. Its red recording light blinked steadily. Someone had been watching us sleep, watching us in our most private moments. My phone buzzed. A notification from the rental app. A message from our host. "Hope you're enjoying your stay. The view is lovely this time of year." The timing couldn't be coincidental. Whoever was watching knew I'd found the camera. I grabbed Jake's hand and ran back to the cabin, my heart hammering. Sarah took one look at my face and knew something was terribly wrong. I showed her the camera, the message. Her face went white. "We're leaving," she said immediately. "Right now." But as I reached for the car keys, the hook was empty. I searched frantically. Pockets, counters, everywhere. Nothing. My phone buzzed again. A photo appeared. Our car, with a knife protruding from the front tire. The message below read, "Going somewhere." The cabin lights flickered, then stabilized. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of movement in the tree line. A figure in dark clothing, too far away to make out clearly, but close enough to know we were being watched, right now. More messages followed, each more invasive than the last. Photos of Emma's drawings, taken from inside the cabin. A shot of Sarah reading by the bedroom window. Proof that our privacy had been completely violated, that every moment had been documented. "He's been in here," Sarah whispered, pulling the kids close. "While we were sleeping, swimming. He's been inside. We barricaded the doors with furniture, drew all the curtains. But it felt useless. He had keys, cameras, complete access to our lives. The cabin that had felt like a sanctuary now felt like a trap. Around midnight, the power died. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the kids' frightened whimpers. My phone, nearly dead, showed one final message. "Show's almost over." Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. The front door handle rattled, then stopped. He was testing our defenses, playing with us. I gripped a heavy flashlight like a weapon, positioning myself between my family and the door. A soft scratching sound came from beneath the floorboards near the bedroom. He wasn't just outside. He was under the cabin, in a crawl space we'd never noticed. The scratching grew louder, more urgent. Wood splintered. "Stay back," I whispered to Sarah, moving toward the sound. A section of floorboard suddenly gave way, and a hand shot through. Pale, dirty, very human. A man's voice, calm and conversational. "Hello, David. You've been such wonderful subjects." I brought the flashlight down hard. He cried out and withdrew, scrambling away through the darkness beneath us. We didn't wait to see if he'd return. I found a spare tire in the shed and changed it by flashlight while Sarah got the car started. We threw the kids in the back seat and drove away from that nightmare, leaving everything behind. The police found evidence of an elaborate surveillance network. The host, a local man named Marcus Webb, had been running illegal voyeuristic operations for years, targeting families through fake rental listings. He collected thousands of hours of footage, selling it online to communities that specialized in authentic family content. Webb was arrested, but the investigation revealed he was part of a larger network spanning multiple states. Dozens of families had been victimized, their private moments stolen and commodified. We moved after that, changed our online habits, became hyper-vigilant about privacy, but the damage was done. Emma still checks for cameras in every room we enter. Jake refuses to sleep without all the curtains drawn. Sarah and I went through months of counseling, trying to process the violation. The worst part isn't the immediate terror, it's the lingering doubt. How long had he been watching before that trip? Had there been other cameras, other violations we never discovered? Every family photo now feels contaminated. Every private moment poisoned by the possibility that someone else was watching. And sometimes, late at night, I still wonder about that network. The police caught one man, but how many others are out there? How many families are booking their dream vacations right now, not knowing they're walking into a carefully constructed trap? Because the most terrifying truth I learned is that our privacy is an illusion, and the people who want to watch us are always one step ahead, always adapting, always finding new ways to turn our most precious moments into their entertainment. The view really is lovely this time of year, especially when you don't know someone else is enjoying it with you. The log flume ride groaned as it sent another screaming group down the chute, water splashing over the sides. I stood at the control booth, sweat trickling down my back under the Tennessee sun, my hands sticky on the levers. It was just another shift at Smoky Ridge Amusement Park, a rundown place off a dusty highway. Kids laughed, parents griped about the heat, and the air smelled of popcorn and chlorine. Then I heard it, a faint clank, like metal on metal, echoing from the grate beneath the ride's platform. I glanced down, but saw nothing in the dark slats. Probably just a loose bolt, I thought, but my neck prickled, like someone was staring at me from the crowd. Why did it feel like the noise was calling me? I'm Jake, 19. a college freshman desperate for cash in the summer of 2023. I took this job to save for tuition, figuring a theme park gig would be easy. Push buttons, watch kids scream, go home. The park was a relic, its paint peeling, the rides creaking like they might collapse. My boss, Ray, was a wiry guy in his 50s who lived in a trailer on the property. He had this intense stare, like he was sizing you up, and he'd bark orders without blinking. Stay out of the maintenance tunnels, he'd said on my first day, his voice sharp. They're dangerous. I nodded, but his warning stuck with me, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. The day dragged on, the clanking from the grate coming and going. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the ride's rhythm, the churn of the water, the screech of the logs. But during a lull, I noticed Ray watching me from across the midway. His eyes locked on me through the crowd. He turned away when I caught his gaze, but my stomach twisted. Later, I found a crumpled missing poster under the control booth. Some kid named Tyler, 17, last seen at the park 2 summers ago. Weird, but I shrugged it off. People lose things here all the time. That night, as I locked up, my keys slipped from my hand and fell through the grate, clattering into the dark below. I cursed, shining my phone's flashlight down. The tunnel's entrance was nearby. A rusted hatch Ray had pointed out once, his face tight. Don't go down there, he'd said again. But I needed those keys. The park was empty now, the midway silent except for the hum of cicadas. I pried the hatch open, the hinges screaming, and descended the ladder. The air was damp, thick with mildew, and the tunnel smelled like oil and rot. My flashlight beam danced across pipes and wires, catching something. A faint scratching, like paper shifting. The tunnel was a maze, low and cramped, my shoulders brushing the walls. The scratching grew louder, leading me to a rusted door marked storage. My heart pounded, but I pushed it open. Inside was a small room, lit by a flickering bulb. A cot sat in one corner, blankets stained and rumpled. A table held a stack of missing posters, dozens of them, all teenagers, all park employees. Their faces stared up at me, some smiling, some serious, their eyes haunting in the dim light. My breath caught. Tyler's poster was there, and so was one for a girl named Sarah, gone last summer. At the bottom of the stack, I saw my name, Jake Miller. On a blank poster, my employee ID photo taped to it. My hands shook as I backed away, the posters spilling to the floor. The scratching wasn't paper. It was coming from the wall, a steady, deliberate scrape. I spun around, my flashlight catching a shadow moving behind a stack of crates. "Who's there?" I called, my voice cracking. No answer, just the scrape, louder now, like nails on concrete. I bolted for the door, but it slammed shut, the lock clicking. My flashlight flickered, plunging the room into darkness. Footsteps shuffled closer, heavy and slow, and I smelled cigarette smoke. Ray's brand. Overreacting Jake, I whispered to myself, my back pressed against the wall. But the posters, my name, the shadow, they were real. I fumbled for my phone. No signal, the battery draining fast. The footsteps stopped, and a low voice rasped, "You shouldn't be here." It was Ray, but his tone was wrong, cold, like he was savoring the words. A metal clank echoed, like a tool being picked up. I grabbed a pipe from the floor, my hands slick with sweat, and swung it at the crates, hoping to make noise, anything to draw attention. The crates toppled, and I heard Ray curse, his footsteps stumbling. I lunged for the door, jamming the pipe into the lock and prying it open. The tunnel stretched before me, my flashlight barely cutting through the dark. Ray's footsteps were behind me, faster now, his breathing ragged. "You don't get it, kid," he growled. "They all leave. You will too." My legs burned as I ran, the tunnel twisting, my shoulders slamming into pipes. I found the ladder, scrambling up, my hands slipping on the rungs. The hatch was still open, moonlight spilling in. I burst onto the platform, gulping air, and sprinted toward the park's exit, Ray's footsteps echoing below. I reached the parking lot, my truck in sight, when Ray's voice called out, "Calm now. You'll be back, Jake." I didn't look back, just jumped in and peeled out. the tires screeching. I drove straight to the county sheriff's office, my hands shaking on the wheel. I told them everything. The room, the posters, my name. They searched the park that night, but the room was empty, the posters gone. Ray claimed he'd been in his trailer, said I was stressed imagining things. The sheriff found no evidence, just my word against his. They let him go. I quit the job, moved back to my parents' house, and never went near that park again. The police called it a prank, said Ray was just a weird loner. But I saw his eyes when they questioned him, calculating, like he was already planning his next move. Those kids on the posters, some were found, runaway cases, others still missing. Ray's motive? Control. Maybe. A sick need to own people, to make them disappear. I check my locks every night now. Keep a bat by my bed. The park's still open, Ray's still there, last I heard. And sometimes, when the wind's quiet, I hear that scratching again, like paper shifting, calling my name from the dark. The Airbnb listing was a dream. A secluded A-frame cabin, nestled deep in the coastal forests of Oregon. The pictures showed a cozy fireplace, a well-stocked kitchen, and huge windows looking out into a sea of towering pine trees. As a graphic designer trying to escape a brutal burnout, it was everything I wanted. Solitude, silence, and no cell service. The host, a woman named Eliza, was lovely in her messages, promising I'd have the place entirely to myself. For the first 2 days, it was perfect. I went on long hikes, breathed in the smell of damp earth and pine, and felt the city's frantic energy finally start to leave my system. But on the third night, as I lay in the cozy downstairs bedroom, I heard it. Footsteps. They were soft, a gentle shuffling sound coming from directly above me. From the attic, I froze, my ears straining in the dark. It had to be an animal, I told myself. A raccoon or a possum that had found its way into the crawl space. It was an old cabin, after all. That had to be it. I rolled over and tried to ignore the frantic beating of my own heart. The next morning, I noticed something odd. The carton of milk I'd bought was lighter than I remembered, and a single slice of bread was missing from the loaf I'd left on the counter. I frowned. Did I have a snack last night? I was so tired. Maybe I'd gotten up and forgotten. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off. My mind was playing tricks on me. A product of being completely alone for the first time in years. But the footsteps came back the next night, a little bolder this time. And the next morning, more food was gone. A single apple from the fruit bowl. Another slice of bread. This time, I knew I hadn't eaten it. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. I checked the attic door at the top of the stairs. It was locked with a heavy-duty padlock, just as the host's welcome note had said. I started to feel a constant prickling sense of being watched. When I sat on the porch, I'd catch myself scanning the dense woods surrounding the cabin. Inside, the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt heavy, expectant. I started double-checking the locks on the doors and windows, my rational brain fighting a losing battle against a rising tide of primal fear. Was I going crazy? Was the isolation getting to me? I had to know. The rational part of me needed proof. That night, before I went to sleep, I propped my phone up on the dresser, hidden behind a stack of books. I started a video recording, the lens aimed at the bedroom door and the small section of the ceiling directly above my bed. I told myself I was doing it to prove there was a raccoon in the attic, that I'd have a funny story to tell Eliza when I left. But deep down, I knew I was looking for something else. I slept fitfully, waking at every creak of the old cabin. In the morning, sunlight streamed through the window, and for a moment, everything felt normal again. I almost deleted the video, feeling foolish. But my curiosity and a lingering sense of dread made me press play. What I saw on that screen still makes me sick to my stomach. The first few hours of the video were just me, tossing and turning in the dark. Then, around 3 a.m., something changed. On the ceiling, a thin, dark line appeared, a seam I'd never noticed before. It was a trapdoor, perfectly flush with the wooden planks. It opened silently. A figure descended, not on a ladder, but by dangling and dropping silently to the floor. It was a woman, gaunt and pale, her hair long and matted. She wore clothes that looked like they were falling apart. She moved with an unnerving, practiced grace, her bare feet making no sound on the floorboards. She went into the kitchen. I watched in horrified silence as she opened my fridge, drank from my carton of milk, and ate a slice of my bread. Then she came back into the bedroom, and she just stood there, at the foot of my bed. For over an hour, she stood perfectly still, her head slightly tilted, and watched me sleep. The look on her face wasn't malicious. It was something far more terrifying. It was a look of placid, unemotional ownership, as if I were the intruder, as if this was her house, and I was just a temporary, interesting new piece of furniture. My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't a ghost. This was a person who had been living in the walls, sleeping above my head, watching me. I didn't pack. I didn't even grab my wallet. I snatched my car keys from the hook by the door, sprinted out of the cabin and drove. I drove with my foot pressed to the floor, not stopping until I found a stretch of highway with a single bar of cell service. I called 911, my voice a hysterical, sobbing mess. The police met me at a diner in the next town. They listened to my story, their expressions a mixture of pity and skepticism, until I showed them the video. The shift in their demeanor was immediate. They found her, of course, still in the attic. Her name really was Eliza. She had owned the cabin with her husband until he left her. The bank foreclosed, but she refused to leave. When a property management company bought it and turned it into an Airbnb, she just retreated into the walls, into the secret spaces she and her husband had built. She'd been living there for over a year, a ghost in her own home, secretly living off the food of the guests who came and went, watching them from the shadows. I tell myself I was lucky. She never tried to harm me. But the violation of it, the quiet, intimate terror of being watched by a stranger in what you think is your safest space, it changes you. I moved back to the city. I live in a high-rise now, with concrete walls and no attic. But sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I have to fight the urge to check the locks on my doors, and I can never shake the memory of one small detail from the police report. When they searched her tiny crawl space, they found a collection of small, personal items, a single earring from one guest, a photograph from another, and from my stay, they found the silver locket my grandmother had given me, the one I always took off and left on the nightstand before I went to sleep, the one she must have taken from the table, right next to my head, while I slept. The smell of pine needles and granite dust filled my lungs as Emma and I stepped off the well-worn mist trail onto the narrow dirt path that would take us deeper into Yosemite's backcountry. Our boots crunched softly against the dried leaves scattered across the trail, and somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker hammered against dead bark with mechanical persistence. Everything felt perfect, until I heard the sound that would haunt me for the rest of my life. A faint whistle drifted through the trees behind us. Not the sharp call of a bird, but something melodic and human. The tune was simple, almost childlike, but it carried an odd quality that seemed to echo off the granite wall surrounding us. I stopped walking and listened, but the sound faded into the ambient forest noise. "Did you hear that?" I asked Emma, who was already 20 feet ahead, her red backpack bright against the shadowed trail. "Hear what?" She turned back, pushing a strand of dark hair from her eyes. "Nothing. Just thought I heard. Never mind." But as we continued walking, the feeling of being watched settled over me like a heavy blanket, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than normal. "My name is Marcus Rodriguez, and I'm a 29-year-old software engineer from San Jose. Emma Williams, my girlfriend of 2 years, is a marine biologist who'd convinced me to take this 4-day hiking trip through Yosemite's lesser-known trails. We'd been planning this August getaway for months, mapping out routes that would take us away from the tourist crowds and into the park's more pristine wilderness areas. The Tenaya Creek Trail was supposed to be moderately challenging, with stunning views and minimal foot traffic. Emma had researched it extensively, downloaded GPS coordinates, and packed enough supplies for 3 days of backcountry camping. Everything had gone smoothly until we veered off the main path onto what our map labeled as Trail #47A. Experienced hikers only. The whistling started again 20 minutes later, closer this time, and definitely human. The melody was more complex now, rising and falling in patterns that seemed almost like communication. Emma heard it too. I could tell by the way her shoulders tensed and her hiking pace increased slightly. "That's definitely not a bird," she said quietly. We stopped and listened. The sound came from behind us, maybe 100 yards back. But when we tried to peer through the dense understory of manzanita and oak, we saw nothing. The whistling continued for another 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. "Maybe it's another hiker," I suggested, though something in my gut said otherwise. "Maybe." Emma pulled out her phone to check our GPS position. "We're about 2 miles from the main trail now. Should be seeing the creek soon." But when we started walking again, the whistling resumed, and this time I noticed something that made my blood run cold. When we walked, it followed. When we stopped, it stopped. When we sped up, it got closer. We were being tracked. "Emma," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I think we should head back to the main trail." She nodded, already pulling out her map. But as we studied our position, the whistling changed. Now it seemed to come from ahead of us, from the direction we'd been heading. A different tune, but unmistakably coordinated with the first. "There's more than one," Emma whispered. The realization hit us both simultaneously. We weren't dealing with a curious hiker or even a single stalker. This was organized, planned, coordinated. We were being herded like prey animals, pushed away from the main trail and deeper into wilderness where no one would hear us scream. I pulled out my phone, desperate for cell service, but the granite walls of the canyon blocked any signal. Emma's GPS showed our position, but the battery was already down to 30%, and we were at least 6 miles from the nearest ranger station. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and orange that should have been beautiful, but now seemed ominous. In a few hours it would be dark, and whatever was out there would have every advantage. "We need to get out of here," I said, shouldering my pack. "Now." We started back the way we'd come, moving as quickly as the rough terrain allowed, but the whistling intensified, seeming to come from all directions now. 3 different melodies, 3 different positions, creating a triangle around us that tightened with each step. That's when we saw the first sign. A small cairn of stacked stones that hadn't been there when we'd passed this spot an hour earlier. Someone had built it recently, marking our path, tracking our progress. "Marcus," Emma's voice was tight with fear. "Look at the trees." I followed her gaze and saw them. Small pieces of orange surveyor's tape tied to branches, creating a subtle but clear trail leading deeper into the canyon. We were being guided, manipulated, driven towards something we couldn't see. The whistling stopped entirely, replaced by something worse. Silence. In that silence, I heard footsteps, not the random sounds of wildlife, but the deliberate placement of boots on stone and earth. Multiple sets moving with the practiced stealth of people who knew this terrain intimately. "Run," I whispered. We abandoned the trail, crashing through underbrush toward what we hoped was the direction of the main hiking path. Branches tore at our clothes and scratched our faces, but we pushed forward, driven by pure terror. Behind us, the footsteps quickened, no longer bothering with stealth. They were hunting us openly now. We scrambled up a steep granite slope, using roots and rock holes to pull ourselves higher. From this vantage point, I could see them. 3 figures in dark clothing, moving through the forest below with frightening efficiency. They spread out in a search pattern, checking every hiding spot, every possible escape route. One of them looked up and saw us. He raised his hand, and the other 2 immediately changed direction, beginning their climb up the same slope. "The creek," Emma gasped, pointing to a line of vegetation maybe half a mile to our north. "If we can reach the creek, we can follow it back to the main trail." We half ran, half fell down the opposite side of the slope, using gravity and desperation to stay ahead of our pursuers. The creek was louder now, its rushing water promising salvation and safety. But as we reached the bank, Emma grabbed my arm. "Listen," she whispered. From across the creek came another whistle, different from the others. A fourth person, waiting for us to try exactly what we were attempting. We were surrounded. That's when I saw the camp. A cluster of military-style tents hidden in a grove of trees, maybe 200 yards downstream. Smoke rose from a concealed fire, and I could make out equipment and supplies that suggested these people had been here for weeks, maybe months. This wasn't random. This was their territory, their hunting ground, and we'd walked right into it. They live here, Emma breathed. They're targeting hikers who leave the main trails. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped us back to reality. We had maybe minutes before they reached us, and nowhere left to run. That's when Emma spotted it. A narrow crack in the granite wall. Barely wide enough for a person, but deep enough to provide concealment. We squeezed into the crevice, just as the first pursuer reached the creek bank. Through the narrow opening, I could see him clearly for the first time. A man in his 40s, wearing military surplus clothing, and carrying what looked like zip ties, and a knife. His eyes scanned the area methodically, professionally. The others joined him, and I heard voices for the first time. Low, controlled conversation about search patterns and the package. They weren't just hunting for sport. They were planning to take us somewhere, to do something to us that required restraint and isolation. We stayed hidden in that granite crack for 3 hours, listening to them search, watching them coordinate their hunt. As darkness fell, they set up a perimeter around the area, clearly planning to wait us out. That's when Emma made the decision that saved our lives. She still had 30% battery on her GPS, enough for one desperate gamble. While I kept watch, she studied the topographical map, looking for any route that might bypass their positions. There, she whispered, pointing to a section where the creek cut through a narrow canyon. If we can get into the water and follow it downstream, we might be able to get past them. The water was shockingly cold, even in August, and the current was stronger than expected. We let it carry us downstream, holding onto rocks when the flow threatened to separate us, trying not to splash or make any sound that might give away our position. For 20 minutes, we navigated through darkness and rushing water, scraping against granite walls and fallen logs. My fingers were numb, my legs cramping from the cold. But we kept moving until we reached a wider section where the creek joined a larger waterway. We were back in familiar territory. This was the stream that ran alongside the main mist trail, the route we'd taken that morning when the world still made sense. It took us another hour to reach the trailhead, where we found a park ranger finishing his evening patrol. When we told him what had happened, he immediately radioed for backup and began coordinating a search of the area. They found the camp 3 days later, but it was abandoned. Equipment, supplies, and personal items belonging to at least 7 different people were recovered, suggesting this group had been operating for months, targeting isolated hikers and campers. DNA evidence linked the camp to 3 missing persons cases from the past year, but the perpetrators were never caught. The Park Service quietly increased ranger patrols in the backcountry and installed emergency communication devices at remote locations. Emma and I both struggled with PTSD after the incident. We broke up 6 months later, not because we blamed each other, but because being together reminded us both of those hours of terror, of how close we'd come to becoming statistics. I still hike, but never alone, and never on trails that aren't well traveled. I carry a satellite communicator and extra batteries, and I've trained in wilderness survival and self-defense. But sometimes, when I'm on a quiet trail and the wind is just right, I hear it again. That faint whistling melody drifting through the trees. It makes me stop walking, makes me listen for footsteps, makes me remember that there are predators in the wilderness who don't have fangs or claws. They have patience and intelligence and the ability to turn paradise into a hunting ground. Last month, I received a message through a hiking forum I belong to. No username, no profile. Just a private message with GPS coordinates and a single line of text. Thanks for the practice, Marcus. The next group won't be so lucky. The coordinates pointed to a remote section of Olympic National Park, where 2 hikers went missing just last week. Because some hunts never really end. They just move to new territories, find new prey, and perfect their techniques on anyone foolish enough to wander off the beaten path. And somewhere out there, they're still whistling. The crackling of the campfire was hypnotic, sparks fluttering upward against a deep, star-studded Montana sky. We were miles from any city lights, nestled deep in a dense stretch of national forest, the firelight dancing across our laughing faces. It was one of those perfect summer nights, the kind where worries fade away. That's when we started playing truth or dare, innocent enough at first. Then Brandon spoke up. His voice was calm, disturbingly casual as he stared into the flames. "Truth," he murmured softly, eyes reflecting the flickering orange glow. Everyone leaned in closer, smiles already forming in anticipation. "What's the worst thing you've ever done?" Stacey asked, her grin playful, completely unaware of the darkness about to spill from Brandon's lips. Brandon paused, staring deeply into the fire. "Last summer, I killed someone." The laughter died immediately, replaced by a heavy silence punctuated by the distant hoot of an owl. The fire crackled ominously. Brandon lifted his gaze slowly, locking eyes directly with mine. My heart thudded painfully, unease coiling in my stomach. "Yeah, hilarious," Jason finally said, forcing a nervous chuckle. The group joined awkwardly, desperate to ease the tension. But Brandon never laughed. He only continued to watch me through narrowed eyes, expression unreadable. Later that night, I zipped myself inside my tent, telling myself Brandon had an odd sense of humor. Maybe he just wanted attention. People say weird stuff sometimes. I shook it off and buried myself in my sleeping bag, listening to the night. The soft rustle of leaves was soothing, until I heard the distinct crunch of footsteps slowly circling my tent. A chill slithered down my spine. I held my breath, praying it was my imagination. The footsteps stopped just outside. My pulse quickened. Silence hung thick, suffocating. Then came the unmistakable sound of fingertips tracing softly down the nylon tent fabric, dragging methodically from top to bottom. My throat tightened with dread. Someone was right there, watching, waiting. I stayed frozen, ears straining, heart hammering. Eventually, silence returned, but sleep didn't. My imagination conjured shadows outside, a predator lurking just beyond sight. Morning couldn't come fast enough. Morning couldn't come fast enough. By dawn, I emerged, exhausted, scanning faces around the dying embers. Brandon was already awake, staring quietly into the smoldering fire pit, hands trembling slightly. He caught my eye briefly, lips pulling into a slight smirk. It felt like a silent warning. Throughout that day, strange details kept nagging at me. Brandon vanished frequently, slipping away without explanation. Once, I caught him watching me from the tree line, half hidden behind a massive pine, expression blank, eyes unblinking. My stomach knotted, paranoia whispering dark possibilities. "You're imagining things," I reassured myself repeatedly, but fear lingered like an unwanted guest. Nightfall arrived too soon. The group laughed around the rekindled fire, carefree again, but my gaze kept drifting to Brandon. He sat on the outskirts, face flickering menacingly in firelight, shadows carving sharp angles. When his eyes met mine, I quickly looked away, heart thundering. I stayed awake late, nerves frayed, ears alert. Zoon, faint snores filled the campsite, but every sound outside my tent twisted my stomach tighter. Eventually, exhaustion claimed me. I awoke suddenly to the slow, deliberate sound of my tent zipper inching upward, heart leaping, adrenaline flooding my veins. I bolted upright, frozen by fear. The zipper stopped midway, silence thick and heavy. I stared at the dark gap, waiting, terrified. Then Brandon's voice, cold and low, barely a whisper. "Are you awake?" Panic exploded through me. Muscles locked tight, mouth dry. "Brandon," I croaked. He laughed softly, humorlessly. "I knew you'd be awake. Always watching, always suspicious. What do you want?" My voice shook despite myself. He hesitated. "Just to talk. You're the only one who took me seriously." I didn't respond, my breath ragged, heart racing violently. He continued calmly, chillingly matter-of-fact. It wasn't planned, just an accident. But once I felt that power, taking someone's life, I couldn't stop thinking about it. His fingers crept along the open zipper, pushing it wider. I caught a glimpse of his eyes. Wide, intense, burning with a cold excitement. "Brandon, please." My voice quivered helplessly. "Don't beg," he snapped suddenly, voice shifting abruptly to rage. "You're not supposed to beg. You're stronger than that." I lunged sideways, scrambling desperately toward my backpack. He lunged faster, gripping my ankle fiercely, yanking me backward. My scream ripped through the quiet night, echoing through the trees. I kicked wildly, breaking his grasp momentarily, rolling toward the tent opening. I tore outside, breathless and stumbling barefoot into the darkness. Behind me, Brandon cursed, footsteps pounding after me. I crashed blindly through brush and branches, skin tearing, heart threatening to burst. Suddenly, lights flashed blindingly ahead, campers emerging groggily from their tents. Jason rushed forward, gripping my arms as I sobbed incoherently, gasping out Brandon's name. But Brandon was already there, calm and composed, feigning shock, insisting I'd had a nightmare. Everyone stared uncertainly, caught between disbelief and sympathy. As they glanced awkwardly away, Brandon leaned close, whispering bitterly, "No one's gonna believe you. But you and me, we know the truth." Police arrived the next morning, called by Jason, despite his doubts. But Brandon vanished into the forest, his gear abandoned, leaving no trace. Authorities searched for days, uncovering a shallow grave near our campsite. The body of a young woman, reported missing last summer, lay inside. As I gave my statement, the detective's expression darkened. "You're lucky," he murmured grimly. He would have done it again. Weeks passed. I returned home to civilization, nightmares relentless. Brandon remained free, his face plastered across news reports, warnings of a killer at large. But sightings faded, investigations stalled. Every shadow, every sudden noise filled me with dread. Even locked inside my home, safety felt imaginary. Brandon's whisper haunted me, replaying endlessly. "You and me, we know the truth." And tonight, alone in bed, sleepless and terrified, my phone buzzed. One text from an unknown number. "Miss me yet?" As I stared in horror at the glowing screen, footsteps crunched softly outside my window, the darkness pressing close, cold and hungry. A terrible certainty settled in my chest. Brandon had found me. I realized with sickening clarity, this nightmare would never truly end. The campfire crackled softly in the darkness of Yosemite Valley, casting dancing shadows across the granite walls that rose like ancient cathedrals around our campsite. My wife Jenny was roasting marshmallows for some more, the sugar caramelizing with that perfect burnt sweet smell that takes you back to childhood summers. Everything felt peaceful, normal, exactly what we'd needed after months of city stress and work deadlines. That's when I heard it, a wet, phlegmy cough, coming from the blue dome tent pitched maybe 15 feet from ours. The sound was harsh and prolonged, like someone trying to clear fluid from their lungs. I glanced over at the tent, noting its perfect condition and expensive brand, but something felt off. We'd been at this campsite for 2 days, and I'd never seen anyone go in or out of it. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Jenny. She looked up from the fire, marshmallows still dripping from her skewer. "Hear what?" The coughing had stopped, but now I was watching the tent with new attention, noticing details that hadn't registered before. The zipper was closed completely, no camp chairs outside, no cooler equipment visible. Most telling of all, no footprints in the dirt around the entrance, despite the soft earth that should have shown signs of daily traffic. "My name is Tom Mitchell, and I'm a 34-year-old insurance investigator from Sacramento." Jenny and I had driven up to Yosemite for a long weekend in September, hoping to decompress and reconnect after a rough patch in our marriage. We'd reserved Campsite 47 in Upper Pines Campground, one of the valley's most popular camping areas, surrounded by families and outdoor enthusiasts from around the world. The mysterious tent had been there when we arrived on Friday afternoon. Blue and gray, expensive looking. The kind serious backpackers use for extended wilderness trips. What struck me as odd was its position. Perfectly pitched, guy lines taut, but with no signs of human habitation around it. Maybe they're just really tidy campers, Jenny had suggested when I first mentioned it. But as Saturday progressed, my investigator instincts kept nagging at me. No one emerged for meals, bathroom breaks, or to enjoy the perfect weather. The tent remained sealed and silent throughout the entire day, like a tomb in the middle of a bustling campground. That night, the sounds started. Around 2 a.m., I woke to rustling fabric, the distinctive sound of someone moving inside a tent, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. Then came that cough again, wet and persistent, followed by what sounded like whispered conversation, not loud enough to make out words, but definitely human voices, at least 2 different tones. I nudged Jenny awake. "Listen," I whispered. We lay there in our sleeping bags, straining to hear. The sounds continued for maybe 20 minutes. Movement, coughing, and those strange whispered exchanges. Then silence. In the morning, I walked casually past the blue tent, pretending to head for the restrooms. Up close, I could smell something wrong. A musty, organic odor that reminded me of wet leaves and decay. The tent fabric looked pristine, but there were dark stains near the bottom. And when I bent down to tie my shoe, I noticed the ground underneath was different from the surrounding area, darker and slightly sunken. "Tom, you're being paranoid," Jenny said when I shared my observations over coffee. "People camp differently. Maybe they're night owls, or they have some kind of medical condition that makes them stay inside during the day." But Sunday night proved her wrong. The sound started earlier this time, around midnight. Not just movement and coughing, but something that made my blood run cold. A rhythmic scraping, like metal on stone, coming from directly beneath the tent. It went on for hours, punctuated by those wet coughs and urgent whispers. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped our tent flap slightly, peering out into the darkness. The blue tent was maybe 30 feet away, and I could see it moving. Subtle bulges and shifts in the fabric, like something large was moving around inside. But the movement seemed wrong somehow. Too low to be someone sitting up. Too fluid to be normal human activity. "Tom, what are you doing?" Jenny whispered, but I held up my hand for silence. That's when I heard something that made my skin crawl. A woman's voice, thin and desperate, saying, "Please, I can't." Not again. The words were barely audible, but the terror in them was unmistakable. I was reaching for my phone to call 911 when the scraping sound intensified, followed by what sounded like dirt being moved, shoveled, redistributed. Someone was digging, and they were doing it from inside the tent. "Jenny, get dressed," I whispered urgently. "We're getting out of here." "What?" "Tom, it's 3 a.m. "What's going on?" "Something's wrong with that tent, really wrong. We need to find a ranger." We threw our essentials into one bag and quietly broke camp, loading our car in the darkness while keeping one eye on the blue tent. As we drove toward the campground entrance, I could see it in my rearview mirror, still shifting and moving in the beam of the security lights. The ranger station was closed, but we found Ranger Martinez making his late-night security rounds. When I explained what we witnessed, his expression grew serious. "Blue tent, Site 48, he asked. "We've had reports about that area before. Campers complaining about noises, strange smells. But every time we check during the day, there's nothing." "Will you check it now?" I asked. "I'll take a look, but if someone's legally camping there, there's not much I can do about noise complaints." We followed Martinez back to the campground in our car, watching as he approached the blue tent with his flashlight and radio. He called out standard ranger protocol. "Hello? Park service? Anyone in there?" No response. He circled the tent, examining it with his light, then did something that surprised me. He knelt down and pressed his ear to the ground near the entrance. After a moment, he stood up and used his radio. "I need backup at Upper Pines, Site 48, and bring the shovel from maintenance." 2 hours later, as dawn broke over Yosemite Valley, we watched as rangers and county deputies excavated the area beneath where the tent had been pitched. They found a carefully concealed entrance to what appeared to be a natural cave system, camouflaged with a wooden trapdoor and covered with soil and vegetation. The cave extended maybe 15 feet underground, equipped with battery-powered lights, sleeping bags, and containers of food and water. But most disturbing were the personal belongings they recovered. Driver's licenses, wallets, and jewelry belonging to 7 different people, all reported missing from various national parks over the past 2 years. The tent itself, when examined closely, was exactly as I'd observed from a distance: moldy, stained, and clearly abandoned for weeks. But the cave system underneath had been actively used recently. Someone had been living there, using the tent as camouflage, while moving through the underground tunnels that connected to various points throughout the valley. Ranger Martinez Latter explained that they'd been tracking a suspected human trafficking operation that used national parks as waypoints, moving victims through remote areas where they could operate without detection. The underground hideouts allowed them to stay invisible during the day while conducting business at night. The voices you heard, he told us, were probably victims being held temporarily before transport. The coughing, the digging sounds. They were expanding the tunnel system, making it harder for us to track them. The investigation ultimately led to the arrest of a network that had been abducting hikers and campers, using them for forced labor in remote marijuana operations throughout the Sierra Nevada. The cave system in Yosemite was just one of dozens of similar hideouts they'd constructed in national parks across California. Jenny and I gave statements to federal investigators, but the experience shattered something fundamental about our sense of safety in nature. We'd thought the wilderness was dangerous because of bears and falls and weather. We never imagined that predators could literally live beneath our feet, using our trust in the park system against us. I still camp, but differently now. I research every campground, check recent incident reports, and never ignore my instincts when something feels wrong. I carry a satellite communicator and know the exact protocol for reporting suspicious activity to park authorities. But mostly I listen. I listen for sounds that don't belong, for voices in distress, for the whispered conversations of people who should be sleeping, but aren't. Because that night in Yosemite taught me that monsters are real, and they're smart enough to hide in plain sight, patient enough to wait for the perfect victim, and organized enough to turn paradise into a hunting ground. 3 months after our experience, I received a letter forwarded through the Park Service. No return address, postmarked from somewhere in Nevada. Inside was a single photograph of a campground I didn't recognize, with a familiar blue tent pitched in the background. On the back, someone had written in neat handwriting, "Thanks for the practice run, Tom. Next time we'll be more careful about the noise. The tent is still out there somewhere, in some other park, at some other campsite, and underneath it, predators are waiting for the next family who thinks they're safe in America's protected wilderness, because some campsites aren't what they seem, and some tents are doors to places you never want to go." In Florida, summer isn't a season. It's a sentence. The heat is a physical weight, the air thick enough to drink. When I was 11, in the summer of 2002, the only relief from that suffocating heat was the promise of 2 things: the community pool and the distant, tinny jingle of an ice cream truck. That sound was the anthem of our childhood. It meant freedom, sugar, and a few precious minutes of frozen bliss. My friends, Leland and Ben, and I would drop our bikes in a tangled heap on the lawn and sprint inside, begging our moms for a few crumpled dollar bills. And when we heard it one Tuesday afternoon, we weren't alarmed. We were thrilled. We were biking down the long, curving expanse of Palmetto Drive when the first few notes of Pop Goes the Weasel drifted through the humid air. But something was wrong. The melody was warped, slurring like a cassette tape left on a hot dashboard. It was slow. Painfully slow. An old beat-up truck rounded the corner. It was white, with streaks of rust bleeding from the wheel wells. The cartoon ice cream cones painted on the side were faded, their cheerful faces peeled and sun-bleached into what looked more like leering masks. It drove past us, the distorted music seeming to drag in the heat, and continued down the road without stopping. "That was weird," Liam said, wiping sweat from his forehead. We shrugged it off. Maybe the speaker was broken, but 5 minutes later, on a different street, we heard it again. The same truck. The same funeral dirge version of a children's song. It passed us, a dark shape visible behind a tinted windshield, and turned at the next corner. It didn't stop. It didn't slow down. It just passed us. The third time it happened, the thrill was gone, replaced by a cold, prickling unease. We were on the other side of the neighborhood, near the retention pond, and there it was, idling at the end of the cul-de-sac, waiting. The music was even slower now, each note groaning with a sick, mechanical sorrow. It wasn't looking for customers. It was looking for us. We were just kids. We didn't have words like stalking or predator in our active vocabulary, but we had instinct. And every instinct screamed that this was wrong. The rest of the afternoon was spent with one eye constantly over our shoulders, our bike rides taking on a new, frantic urgency. We'd see it in the distance, a flash of white at the end of a street, the faint, distorted melody hanging in the air like a bad smell. It never got too close. It just shadowed us, a shark circling in the deep. We tried to tell our parents. My dad, watching the evening news, just waved a hand dismissively. It's an ice cream truck. Driving around neighborhoods is what it does. They saw it through adult eyes, a harmless piece of nostalgia. We saw it for what it was, a threat that had singled us out. The paranoia took root. We started biking in a tight cluster, never letting anyone lag behind. We made a rule, never be the last one to leave. One afternoon, Ben's chain slipped off his bike. Liam and I circled back, and that's when we saw it. The truck was parked a block away, silent for the first time. The music was off. It was just sitting there, watching us fix the chain, its windows dark and inscrutable. The silence was somehow more terrifying than the music. The true terror came a week later. I'd stayed late at Liam's house, and I was biking home alone as the sky bruised from orange to a deep, dusky purple. I was on my street, just 3 houses down from my own, when I heard it. The slow, dragging notes of Pop Goes the Weasel. I turned. The truck was at the far end of the street, its single headlights cutting 2 perfect cones through the twilight. It started moving toward me, a lumbering metal beast. I pedaled as hard as I could, my small legs pumping furiously, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The jingle seemed to chase me, clinging to my back. I threw my bike in the driveway and sprinted for the front door, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking. I didn't look back until I was safely inside, the deadbolt locked. I peeked through the blinds. The truck was parked directly in front of my house. The jingle ground to a halt with a final dying groan. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, with a loud, rusty screech that scraped at my nerves, the side serving window slid open. The side serving window slid open. I expected to see a face, but there was nothing. Just a rectangle of profound, bottomless darkness. Then, something was tossed from the opening. It landed on our lawn with a soft, dull thud. It was a bike helmet, a green one, covered in dinosaur stickers. It was the same one worn by a 7-year-old kid named Noah, who lived 2 neighborhoods over. The same Noah who had gone missing a week ago, and whose face was now on flyers stapled to every telephone pole in town. My blood turned to ice water. This wasn't just a threat. It was a trophy case. A message. Then the back doors of the truck began to swing open. I screamed. A raw, terrified sound. My dad came running down the stairs. By the time he got to the window, the truck was gone, peeling away down the street with a roar of its engine. The police found the truck 2 days later, abandoned in a desolate lot near the Everglades. The inside was stripped bare, except for the lingering, sickly sweet smell of melted ice cream and something else, something metallic and wrong. In a hidden compartment, they found a small, heartbreaking collection. A single pink sneaker, a tarnished silver bracelet, a child's library card. But they found no fingerprints, no DNA, no clue as to who had been driving it. The driver, like Noah, was a ghost. I'm 30 now. I live in a city 1,000 miles from Florida. I have a child of my own. I thought I'd left that summer behind me, locked away with other childhood fears, but the sound of an ice cream truck still makes my stomach clench. Last week I was walking my son home from the park. It was a beautiful day. Then I heard it. A faint, tinny melody from a few streets over. It wasn't Pop Goes the Weasel. But it was slow. Distorted. My son's eyes lit up, but all I felt was a cold, familiar dread. And as we got to our front door, I looked back down the street and saw it. A flash of white turning the corner at the far end of the block. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that it was just making its first pass.